On Mother's Day, my son, a young, wealthy, and busy businessman, came to visit me, holding a bouquet as bright as the morning sunday. He placed it on the table, looked at me with a gentle but distant expression, and said, "Mom, my wife still sends you $5,000 every month, right? I just want to make sure you're comfortable." I froze. My heart started pounding. $5,000? For the past 8 months, I'd been living on food packages from the church and small donations from kind neighbors. I whispered, my voice trembling, "Son, the church is helping me get by." He stared at me, the smile vanishing from his lips. And then my daughter-in-law appeared radiant in a silk dress, shiny high heels, and a cloud of expensive perfume that drifted through the room like mockery. Her smile was dazzling, but her eyes were colder than any winter I've ever known. She didn't realize that on that very day, the last light of her elegance would fade forever. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Margaret Hayes, a 67-year-old widow living alone in a small house on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas. This house used to be filled with laughter, the place where my husband and I raised our only son, David. After my husband passed away from a heart attack 10 years ago, I learned to slow down, tending my garden, cooking, occasionally teaching Bible classes at St. Mary's Church down the street. I didn't have much, but it was enough until old age came knocking, and everything grew more expensive with each passing day. David, the boy I once carried in my arms, is now a millionaire at 38. He owns a chain of tech companies, drives a brand new Tesla, and lives in a mansion in Park Cities where the annual property tax alone equals what I've earned in my entire life. I was proud of him, of course. I raised him with these hands, believing he would grow into a good, kind, and grateful man. So when he walked into my house that afternoon, sunlight spilling across his tired but handsome face, my heart warmed until he spoke. "Mom, my wife still sends you $5,000 every month, right?" It felt like someone had sucked the air out of the room. My heart pounded against my ribs, and my fingers clenched the corner of my old apron. I tried to smile, but my lips were dry as dust. $5,000? I repeated, my voice catching. "Son, the church is helping me survive." David's eyes widened, his smile dissolving. He glanced toward the woman who had just entered, Clara, his wife, in a pearl-colored silk dress and shimmering silver heels. The scent of Chanel, no. 5 filled my small living room, overpowering the smell of the apple pie I had just baked to welcome my son. Clara smiled lightly, a smile that could melt a room if it weren't so cold. "Oh, Mother, you must have forgotten," she said sweetly, her voice like honey over ice. "I stop by every month to bring the money, remember?" I looked at her calmly. "If you did bring it, then it must have gotten lost somewhere," I said, barely above a whisper. The room fell silent. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the hum of cars outside, and the pounding of my own heart. David looked between us, between the gray-haired mother in her apron and the glamorous wife in her designer dress. His brow furrowed. "Clara, you have been bringing the money, right? I transfer it to you every month." Clara tilted her head, her smile unwavering. "Of course, David. I come here every month." "Maybe Mother just forgot. You know, old age. The memory isn't what it used to be." The words were soft as feathers, but they landed on my heart like stone. Old age. I'd heard that phrase too many times since my husband died from people who thought an old widow was nothing but a fading memory. But I knew my memory. I remembered every bill, every prayer, every face at church. And I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that Clara had never given me a single penny. I nodded slightly, choosing silence. Some battles aren't meant to be fought right away, they're meant to be observed. David stood, walked over, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mom, it's probably just a misunderstanding. I'll check the accounts." I just want you to live comfortably, without worry. I smiled faintly, but something inside me had awakened a quiet storm of suspicion and resolve. I said nothing more, just cleared the table and placed a glass of orange juice in front of him. As David sat down, Clara moved gracefully to his side, resting a possessive hand on his shoulder. Her gaze swept over me, cool, dismissive, the look of someone who believes money can buy integrity. The air in the room turned cold. Even though the sun outside was blazing, a chill ran down my spine. Clara glanced around the room, her eyes brushing over the old photo frames on the wall. David as a little boy, golden hair, bright eyes, a carefree smile. She exhaled softly. "You've done such a great job keeping the house clean, Mother, even at your age." I smiled faintly. "Old, yes, but not so old that I forget who comes through my door, Clara." David looked at me uneasy. "Mom, come on, it's Mother's Day. Don't get upset. I just want you to be happy." "My son," I said, my eyes still on Clara. "So do I. But happiness doesn't come from what people say they've done for you, it comes from what they've actually done." David froze, and Clara's smile tightened before disappearing altogether. After they left, I sat alone in the living room. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, spreading across the old wooden table. $5,000 a month. 8 months. $40,000. That money could have fixed the leaking roof, replaced my broken fridge, helped me live out my final years in comfort. Instead, I'd been counting canned soup from the church pantry and thanking God for every loaf of donated bread. I pressed a hand to my chest, not out of anger, but from the ache that rose inside me. A silent, bone-deep ache. That night, I opened my old notebook, the one where I used to jot down grocery lists and prayers. But this time, I wrote something different. Find the truth. And beneath it, don't trust fake tears. I closed the notebook and took a deep breath. I wasn't weak. I'd survived loss, loneliness, and struggle, and I would survive this too. David might have been fooled, but I hadn't. And if Clara thought I'd sit quietly while she played perfect, she had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. I spent the rest of that afternoon in my small kitchen, sunlight cutting through the curtains into long golden lines across the floor. The jasmine tea on the table had gone cold, but I stayed seated, staring at my old phone, asking myself, could I be wrong? Maybe the bank made a mistake? Maybe Clara sent the money by mail? Or maybe, in a rare moment of confusion, I had simply forgotten? No. I knew every detail, every small gift I had ever received. There had been no letter, no envelope, no money from David. That evening, I pulled out my old accounting ledger, the one I kept from my years as treasurer at the church's women's committee. I flipped through the pages, each line precise: $12 for blood pressure medicine, $24 for utilities, $10 for community dinners at St. Mary's, every expense recorded neatly. No mention of transfer from David Hayes. Nothing. The next morning, I went to First Texas Community Bank, where I still kept a small savings account. I sat across from a young teller named Molly and handed her my passbook. "Please check if there have been any transfers from David Hayes. He says he's been sending me $5,000 each month for the past 8 months." Molly looked surprised, typed a few lines, then shook her head gently. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes, there's nothing. The only activity was a $1.35 interest payment back in February." I nodded, thanked her, and stood up. Outside, the Texas morning wind swept through my gray hair. I stood on the sidewalk, feeling as if a stone had fallen straight through my chest. No transfers, no envelopes, no letters, nothing. For 8 months, I had clipped coupons from the local paper, bought canned soup instead of fresh vegetables, and quietly thanked God every time the church delivered food. I was used to eating alone, counting change before heading to the store, but never, not once, had I imagined that behind my son's silence was a lie. I went home, set my purse down, and sat motionless. The ticking of the wall clock filled the house, the wedding gift my husband had given me 40 years ago. Each slow-moving minute hand seemed to whisper, "The truth is coming." That afternoon I went to St. Mary's Church as usual. Reverend Cole, who'd known me for over 20 years, saw me sitting quietly in the last pew after the service. He walked over, his voice kind. "Mrs. Hayes, are you all right? You look tired today." I smiled faintly, hiding my trembling hands. "I'm just trying to understand why my son's letters never arrived." Reverend Cole placed a hand on my shoulder. "The Lord has a way of bringing truth to light. Don't lose faith." I nodded, but inside faith wasn't enough anymore. I needed action. That night, I opened a brown leather notebook, David's gift for my 60th birthday. On the first page, instead of a prayer, I wrote, "If they're lying, I'll make them tell the truth through the law." I pressed the pen hard into the paper. Under the lamp, the words glowed like a vow. From that day forward, I began documenting everything. Every time Clara visited, I noted the date, time, and her exact words. Thursday, June 14th, Clara stopped by with a cake. Said, "The money's been sent, maybe the bank's delayed." No envelope. No proof. Saturday, July 12th. Called. Said she couldn't come because of a charity meeting. I heard restaurant music in the background. Line by line, I recorded it all. No anger, no hatred, just the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime balancing numbers, knowing they never lie. The weeks that followed, Clara kept visiting, always flawless. Designer dresses, expensive handbags, sparkling heels. Each time, she brought a small gift. Flowers, cookies, sometimes scented candles. But never an envelope. One afternoon in August, while I was watering the garden, her white Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Clara stepped out, radiant as ever, holding a bunch of lavender. "I brought you some flowers to help you relax," she said sweetly. "Stress isn't good for the memory." I set the watering can down and wiped my hands on my apron. "My memory's just fine, Clara. Fine enough to remember that the last time you brought me money was never." Her face twitched, but she quickly recovered with a bright smile. "Oh, Mother, you must be mistaken. I've been sending it. Your bank must be at fault." I smiled and began arranging the flowers. "Maybe, but I already asked the bank. They said nothing's come through for 8 months." Silence. Even the sparrows on the fence stopped chirping. Clara fidgeted with her necklace. "I'll double check," she said quickly, then hurried back to her car, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume. I stood there watching the car disappear, a mix of bitterness and clarity filling my chest. She had lied, and now she knew that I knew. That evening I wrote, "Clara, August 22nd, lied. Nervous, left early." Each line felt like a hammer striking the hurt inside me. I was no longer the frail mother praying in silence. I was Margaret Hayes, the woman who had survived loss, debt, and empty promises, and I would survive once more to reclaim the truth. In the weeks that followed, I contacted David's bank, pretending to ask about family gift transfers. They couldn't share private information, but one kind employee hinted if funds were transferred, they'd have to land in an account under your name. If you never received them, someone might have used a different account in your name. The words sent a chill down my spine. Another account bearing my name, but not mine. I closed my notebook and exhaled deeply. I knew what I was up against. Clara was smart, charming, manipulative, even capable of bending her husband to her will. But I'd been an accountant for 3 companies. I'd managed thousands of dollars without losing a cent. If someone dared to forge my name, I would find them. That night, I reread every note I'd written. The lamplight glowed over my shaky yet steady handwriting. Between the lines, I could almost see my husband's face. He used to say, Margaret, if someone underestimates you, don't shout. Let them hear the sound of the truth instead. I closed the notebook, feeling a strange calm. The next morning I went back to church, carrying a small envelope filled with copies of my notes. I handed it to Reverend Cole and said softly, "Father, if one day I can't come to service, please keep this safe for me." He looked worried. "Margaret, what are you doing?" I smiled gently but firmly. "I'm just preparing for the truth to be heard." As I walked home, my heart felt lighter, as if an invisible weight had been lifted. I knew the road ahead would be long, there would be tears, pain, and betrayal, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I would get back every single $5,000 they took from me, but more than that, I would reclaim the respect they thought I'd lost with age. As the sun set behind the old oak trees, I sat on my porch, gazing at the burning red horizon. In that golden light, I whispered, "Clara, you picked the wrong woman to fool, and this old mother still has a few lessons left to teach you." I smiled faintly, closed my notebook, and wrote one last line at the bottom of the page. "The first step toward justice is memory." And in the Texas dusk, I knew my fight had just begun. That morning the Texas air was warmer than usual. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and jasmine from the vine I'd planted behind the porch. I was trimming my lavender bushes when I heard the low, smooth sound of an expensive engine approaching. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway made my heart tighten slightly. A brand new silver Lexus stopped at the gate, its polished paint gleaming so brightly I had to squint. The door opened, and Clara stepped out stunning, as if she'd just walked out of a fashion magazine. She wore a cream linen dress, oversized sunglasses, and mirror-shiny heels. In her right hand, she carried a large gift basket wrapped with a golden ribbon. She smiled, her voice sweet as honey layered over steel. "Mother, I brought you a little something." David's been in meetings all morning, so I came in his place. I wiped my hands on my apron and watched her climb the porch steps. "How thoughtful." "You two must be very busy," I said softly, without smiling. Clara's gaze wandered across the garden as she exhaled. "Oh my, your garden is still as beautiful as ever. I don't know how you manage it all by yourself." "With these hands and a little patience," I replied, tucking my shears into the potting soil. A moment later, she placed the basket on the patio table. Fancy cookies, a jar of orange marmalade, and a small bottle of wine, all neatly wrapped but lacking any real warmth. I knew that kind of gift, expensive, pretty, and empty. I sat down in the wooden chair, poured 2 glasses of iced tea, and looked her straight in the eye. "Clara, let me ask you something. Where's this month's money? The $5,000 you said you'd bring over?" For a split second, her smile froze, barely noticeable, like a passing cloud. Then she laughed, a sharp, hollow sound like glass tapping glass. "Oh, Mother, I must have left it in the car." Her voice pitched slightly higher as she fidgeted with the glass of tea without drinking it. I glanced toward the driveway, where the Lexus gleamed under the sunday. The reflection off the hood highlighted every smooth curve of the car. A brand new vehicle with temporary plates, clearly a recent purchase. I smiled slowly. "Nice car, Clara. Must have cost quite a bit." She shrugged, her laugh brittle. "Oh, not really, Mother. I just upgraded for convenience. My boutique work requires a professional image." "Of course," I said calmly. "A new car for work, and old envelopes that keep getting left in the car." "How odd." Her face stiffened for half a second before she forced another smile. "Oh, Mother, you don't trust me anymore. Next time I'll bring the bank receipt, all right?" I didn't reply. We sat there quietly, the porch fan whirring softly above us. The sound of cicadas in the yard filled the silence like a restless hum. Clara stood first, pretending to check her watch. "I have to run. I've got a client meeting. But don't worry, I'll remind David to resend the money through the bank. I'm sorry for any small mix-up." I nodded. All right, go on then. Oh, and don't forget the envelope in your car this time. She paused for a second, smiling thinly, a mix of annoyance and caution. You're very sharp, Mother, she said, then turned to leave. I watched her walk away, the sound of her heels striking the wooden steps steady and cold, like a clock ticking down. The car door slammed shut, the engine started, and the Lexus disappeared down the road, leaving a streak of blinding sunlight behind. When the sound of the car faded, I sat back down, my fingers interlaced, a heavy weight pressed against my chest. I no longer had doubts, I knew for sure. I rose and walked back into the house. Each step across the wooden floor echoed like a heartbeat in my mind. I opened the drawer, took out my brown leather notebook, and wrote, September 10th. Clara came alone, brought a gift basket, claimed she left the money in the car. New Lexus. No proof. Voice unsteady, avoided eye contact. I set the pen down and took a deep breath. My hands trembled slightly, but my resolve did not. That afternoon, I walked to the post office down the road, where the public phone still worked. I didn't want to call from home, not when I suspected Clara might be watching. I dialed David's company and spoke politely, my tone steady. Hello, this is Margaret Hayes, David Hayes's mother. I'd like to speak with someone in accounting. It's a personal matter. After a short hold, a middle-aged woman answered. This is Sandra Miller, head accountant. Mrs. Hayes, how can I help you? I gripped the receiver tightly, keeping my voice calm. Thank you, Sandra. I just need to confirm something small. My son said his company has been deducting $5,000 each month from his personal account to send to me. I'd like to know if that's correct. There was a short pause. Then Sandra spoke, her tone hesitant. Mrs. Hayes, I can't disclose personal financial details, but let me check. Yes, I recall seeing automated transfers on the same day every month for that exact amount. It does appear that the money was sent, but I'm not sure to whom. To whom? I repeated. It wasn't sent to me? I'm not certain, Mrs. Hayes. The recipient's name matches yours, but the account number is different. I assumed it was yours. A chill ran down my spine. I forced myself to speak evenly. Thank you, Sandra. That's all I needed for now. I hung up and stood motionless in the phone booth. My heart raced, but my mind was clear as glass. There it was, the truth. Someone had created a fake account under my name. And only one person was close enough to pull that off. Clara. On the walk home, my shadow stretched long across the road. The wind carried the scent of scorched grass and dry earth, a smell that reminded me of poor Texas summers long ago, when my father used to say, if you want to know who's honest, look at their hands. Honest hands always show the marks of work. I thought of Clara's hands, long, manicured fingers, diamond rings, holding designer handbags, not a single callus, not a trace of real labor. That night I skipped dinner. I made a cup of peppermint tea and sat at the kitchen table under the warm yellow light. The house was so quiet I could hear the last cicadas outside fading into the night. I opened a new page and wrote, September 10th. Clara visited, elegant and pretending to care. New car, same lies. Called David's company, confirmed. The money's still being transferred, but not to my account. Tomorrow the truth begins to surface. I put down the pen and closed the notebook. The small lamp reflected my shadow in the window pane. A silver-haired woman, small in stature but with eyes that still burned bright. I knew that starting tomorrow, I wouldn't just be a waiting mother anymore. I would be a seeker of justice. I turned off the light and stepped out onto the porch. The night breeze carried the scent of jasmine and damp wood. In the corner of the garden, moonlight fell on the old wooden bench where my husband and I used to sit and talk. I touched its worn armrest and whispered, Frank, if you were still here, you'd tell me to do what's right, wouldn't you? The only reply was the whisper of wind beneath the eaves, but I understood. It was an answer. I went back inside, locked the door, and stood quietly in front of the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't tired or defeated. She was Margaret Hayes, a mother who would never again let anyone take her dignity. And I knew that when morning came, Clara's game would start to fall apart piece by piece. The next morning, while I was cutting lavender stems to dry, a sudden, firm knock echoed at the door. Not the soft tap of a mail carrier or neighbor. This was steady, deliberate. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to open it. Standing on the porch was a tall, middle-aged man with graying hair, dressed neatly in a charcoal suit that looked a little travel-worn. He smiled politely and gave a small nod. "Mrs. Margaret Hayes? I'm Bennett, chief accountant at your son's company, Hayes and Partners." I narrowed my eyes slightly. "You're Bennett?" "I only know Sandra, the accountant I spoke to on the phone." He nodded. "Yes, Sandra is my assistant. She told me about your call yesterday, and I thought, perhaps you should know a few things." His voice was calm but serious, tinged with regret. I invited him inside and poured a glass of water. Morning light streamed through the window, catching the lines on his face, the look of a man who'd seen more than he wished to. He set his leather briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside was a thick folder, neatly clipped and organized. I saw sharp printed text, rows of numbers, the familiar language of accounting, my world for 30 years before retirement. He slid the folder toward me and spoke slowly. "These are copies of 8 transfers, each for $5,000, $40,000 total. Recipient, an account under the name Clara Hayes." It felt like a bucket of ice water had been poured over me. My hands shook as I flipped through each page. The papers were clear. Sender, David Hayes. Recipient, Clara Hayes. Verified by the bank. Same date every month. Steady as clockwork for 8 months. I looked up, my voice hoarse. "Mr. Bennett, who opened that account?" He sighed, removed his glasses and wiped them with a cloth. "Your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Hayes. Every document for the sub-account bears her signature and a signed authorization from David." I froze. "Authorization? You mean David gave her permission to use my name?" He nodded. "Most likely he didn't read the forms carefully. She presented an ID copy of you, which I suspect was forged, very sophisticated. The system automatically registered it as your account, even though the recipient was her." I pressed a hand to my forehead, the room spinning slightly. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. For 8 months, Clara had used my name, a mother's name, to siphon money from my own son. I asked quietly, "And David? He doesn't know?" Bennett hesitated before answering. "Honestly, I don't think so. David's a hard-working man, but he trusts people too easily. He lets Clara handle most of the paperwork. And..." He paused and looked up at me. "She's also been using the company credit card for personal expenses." I stared at him. "The company card?" "Yes. The corporate credit card of Hayes and Partners. Supposed to be for client entertainment and business expenses, but recently we found irregular charges, spa visits, jewelry, clothing, even first-class flights to New York. Over $30,000 in just 3 months. I sat in silence. The words spa, jewelry, flights echoed in my head like a hammer striking metal. I turned to look out the window. The morning sun glowed over the wooden bench where Clara and I once sat drinking tea while she chatted about her work. I remembered her voice that day. "Mother, David's so busy. I handle everything for him." Now I knew. Everything meant every dollar. I turned back to Bennett, my voice raspy but firm. "Mr. Bennett, if I want to expose this, will you help me?" He met my gaze, his gray-blue eyes steady. "Mrs. Hayes, I believe in justice, but I also believe in evidence. We need to prepare carefully. Otherwise, she'll twist the narrative and turn David against you. Clara is not an easy opponent." I nodded. "I know. I've seen her do it before, smiling while she lies. Bennett gave a faint, grim smile. I'll help, but give me time to gather everything. I need to pull all transaction histories, related documents, and secure written confirmation from the bank that the account isn't yours. It'll take a few days, but I promise we'll have the truth. I looked at him, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in anyone for a long time. Integrity. Thank you, Mr. Bennett, I said softly. You have no idea how much this means to me. He closed the folder and stood. I'm just doing what's right, Mrs. Hayes. And, I'm sorry to say this, but cases like yours happen more often than you'd think. Many people are betrayed by those closest to them. I nodded, my eyes landing on a framed family photo on the wall. David, at 10 years old, grinning beside his father. I remembered that day clearly. It had rained lightly, and my husband had said, "Teach him to tell the difference between good men and smooth talkers, Maggie. They often wear the same smile." Bennett left afterward, leaving me alone with the stack of papers on the table. The door clicked shut, and the house went quiet again. I stared at the thick file. Every transfer line spelled out, each one a piece of evidence of betrayal. I carefully placed everything into a small metal box and slid it under the cabinet. When I turned the key, it felt like I was locking another door, the last door of my trust. As afternoon faded, sunlight spilled across the porch and lit up my gray hair. I brewed a cup of black tea, sat at the kitchen table, and looked out at the garden where the lavender swayed gently in the wind. Everything looked peaceful, but inside me, a quiet fire burned. I took out my notebook, opened to a fresh page, and wrote slowly but firmly, September 11th. Mr. Bennett came. Brought records of 8 transfers, $5,000 each, month, to an account under the name Clara Hayes. Clara is also using the company card for personal spending. David was deceived, not just my money, but his too. I have an ally. The fight begins. I set the pen down and looked toward the window. Outside, the sky burned red, like a streak of fire slashing across the clouds. In a low, steady voice, I said, "Clara, you forgot I worked as an accountant for 40 years. I can read lies in numbers, and this time, the numbers will speak for me." I closed the notebook, feeling lighter. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. There was someone, a witness, willing to stand with me. That night, I slept better than usual. The crickets in the yard sounded like a steady count of hope. In my dream, I saw Bennett standing in a white light, holding up the file, while Clara backed away, her face shaken as each secret peeled back. And when I woke, I knew I was no longer a victim. I was the one setting the truth in motion. 3 days later, with every fact in my head lined up as neatly as rows on a balance sheet, I decided to act. I called David. My son's voice was warm and familiar, but I heard a hint of exhaustion. "Mom, I'm sorry I've been swamped lately. Clara says she's been visiting you regularly, right?" I smiled and kept my tone light. "She has, son. Clara's very thoughtful. I'm thinking of inviting you both to dinner this Sunday. It's been a while since we've had a proper meal together." David agreed happily, never noticing the thin wire hidden in that invitation. I spent all Sunday morning preparing. Not because I wanted a perfect dinner, but because I wanted it to feel completely ordinary. Honey roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, apple walnut salad, and apple pie, David's childhood favorites. I polished my late husband's old silverware and set the dining table with soft candlelight. Everything was arranged carefully, warm, sincere, and just enough to make a liar let down her guard. When the clock struck 6, I heard a familiar engine at the gate. A gleaming silver Lexus slid into the driveway. Clara stepped out first, flawless as always, soft waves in her hair, a jade silk dress, and a faint trail of Dior. David followed with a bouquet of white lilies. "Mom, you look great!" David grinned, placing the flowers on the table. Son, I'm better than ever, thanks to God's grace and the two of you. Clara smiled, her lips curled in that usual smug way. I recognized that look, the look of someone convinced she holds every string. I poured wine and tea, chatted about the weather, the lavender, and the new neighbors down the street. Everything flowed as if no shadow of doubt had ever passed through this house. I let the room warm up, let her relax. When the main course was served, I looked up and smiled. I truly appreciate you both, especially for this month's $5,000. Clara paused just a fraction, then flashed a bright smile and sipped her wine. Oh, Mother, please don't be so formal. I'm just doing what I should. I nodded, pretending to be shy. I'm thrilled. I just bought a new heater. Texas gets chilly early, and thanks to that money, I feel much more at ease. Clara's smile widened, smug and satisfied. She tilted her head toward David as if to say, See, everything's fine. I watched her slowly, then asked in an offhand way, like it was nothing at all. Oh, Clara, I'm just curious. What day do you usually send it? She didn't brace herself, she answered instantly, like a reflex. The 10th every month, Mother. I nodded lightly. But before I could say more, David spoke, a bit puzzled. Wait, not the 10th, honey. I set the auto transfer for the 15th. The room went silent. Do you hear that silence the moment a liar steps right into her own trap? If it were you, facing someone who deceived you like this, would you stay quiet like I did or call it out on the spot? Tell me in the comments. I think most of us have lived through a shattered dinner like that at least once. The faint clink of a knife on a plate sounded harsh. They stared at each other. Clara forced a smile and blinked a few times. David frowned, tilting his head. Really? She said with a strained laugh. I thought you said the 10th. David frowned deeper. No, I'm sure it's the 15th. I picked that day because that's when payroll hits. The room sank into a cold stillness. I smiled gently and set my fork down. Oh, wonderful. I'll go to the bank on the 15th to check. Just to make sure the system isn't having issues. Clara gave a brittle laugh, trying to hide her unease. Oh, Mother, you're so careful. Don't worry, I've been sending it regularly. David nodded, but his eyes had shifted. He turned to his wife, about to say something, but she quickly changed the subject to work and the weather. I sat quietly, watching them both. Inside me was a clean, perfect calm, the calm of someone who knows she's set the exact right trap. After dinner, I brought out dessert crisp apple pie, cinnamon drifting through the room. David praised it. Clara barely ate, glancing at her watch as if eager to leave. I knew she was struggling to breathe in a room she thought she controlled. At the door, I said softly, Thank you both for coming. I haven't laughed this much in a long time. Remember, I'll check the account on the 15th just to be sure the bank system isn't acting up. Clara forced a smile. Yes, Mother. I'm sure there won't be any problem. David kissed my cheek, his eyes gentle as always. But I saw something else there, a thin new line of doubt. When the Lexus pulled away, I stood in the doorway, watching the taillights fade. The night wind moved through the yard, rattling the wooden door. I went back inside and closed it softly. What I felt wasn't triumph, it was release. I went straight to the small office off the kitchen and turned on the computer. The glow from the screen caught my husband's photo. His kind smile felt like a quiet push forward. I opened my email and wrote to the only two people I trusted now, Bennett, the honest accountant, and Amelia Rowe, my old college friend, who now specializes in financial fraud. I typed slowly, heartbeat steady, eyes clear. Subject: It's time to begin. Bennett. Amelia. Everything's ready. I just confirmed Clara lied about the transfer date. They think I believe them, but they contradicted each other right to my face. I want us to move forward with the plan. Please start checking all transactions and prepare the comparison file. By the 15th, I want every piece of evidence lined up. It's time for her to self-destruct. Margaret. I reread the last line and smiled faintly. There was something about self-destruct that made me feel lighter, not from vengeance, but because justice would come from the liar's own hands. I hit send and leaned back. Outside, the night breeze stirred the curtains with the scent of jasmine and damp soil. I closed my eyes and listened to the clock ticking, counting down to the 15th, the day the truth would begin to crack through. 2 days later, Bennett replied. The email was short, just like him. I obtained confirmation from the bank. The account under your name was opened by Clara with forged documents. They'll release data once we have a subpoena. Amelia will handle that. Everything is moving in the right direction, B. I read it, feeling my chest tighten and then loosen like hearing an old iron gate swing open. I'm not cruel. I just want the truth spoken so my son can wake up. I want David to understand that trust is not a blank check for someone to drain until nothing is left. That night I opened my notebook and added one more line as a small ritual. September 13th, dinner. Went perfectly. Clara exposed herself. David began to doubt. 15th bank check. Justice is coming, soft as a breeze. I closed the notebook and blew out the candle. In the dark, moonlight filtered through the window onto my face. I looked in the mirror and saw a silver-haired woman, slight but bright-eyed. And I whispered slowly, to myself, or maybe to my husband, long gone. Frank, do you see? She thinks she's clever, but her own mouth tightened the noose. All I have to do is stay quiet and wait for the 15th. I smiled a small smile, warm enough to fill the room. The trap was set, and the prey was walking in. The next morning, the Texas sky was startlingly clear. I sat by the window with a cup of hot jasmine tea, strangely calm. Today was the day Bennett had promised to send everything. In just a few hours, every lie would have a shape black ink on white paper. Around 8 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Bennett. Mrs. Hayes, his voice steady and low. It's all done. I just sent you the full statements with related invoices. Amelia has reviewed them, she says, with your signature. We can open a legal case. I thanked him softly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I never imagined that at my age I'd need an accountant and a lawyer just to protect the money my son intended for me. 15 minutes later, the mail carrier knocked. A large, sealed manila envelope stamped, confidential, Hayes financial record. I set it on the table and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside were dozens of clean printouts, 8 transfers, each for $5,000, $40,000 in total. Sender, David Hayes. Recipient, Clara Hayes. Bold, even lines on official bank paper. I read them twice and still felt disbelief, as if the numbers were laughing at my faith. At the bottom, Bennett's blue ink note, Mrs. Clara Hayes used this as a personal account. In addition to the 8 transfers, there are other charges. Via the secondary card, spa, shopping, travel, and a new car lease. Total spending over 8 months, $47,800. I sat still. Morning light slipped through the blinds and laid a pale gold over the pages, the color of truth. I turned to the next sheet. A spa receipt in Houston for $1,200. Cancun travel for 2 people, $3,600. A new Lexus purchase with a $15,000 down payment. Each receipt was a small knife. I remembered her walking into my house, perfumed and polished, holding gifts, smiling softly, saying, "Mother, I just want you to know I care for you like my own." Now I understood care meant draining every dollar under my name. I sat for a long time, breathed deeply, then reached for my brown leather notebook, the one I call my Justice Journal. Under the date, I wrote carefully, one clear word at a time, September 17th. Received Bennett's records, 8 transfers of $5,000, all into Clara's hands. Spa, travel, new car. $47,800, the price of trust. My hand trembled, not from fear, but because I was about to reclaim the dignity that had been stolen. That afternoon, Amelia Rowe called. Her voice was firm and precise, the tone of someone seasoned by tough courtrooms. "Margaret, I've reviewed everything Bennett sent. It's all solid. This is a textbook case of financial exploitation of an elder. We can go criminal or civil, your call." I paused, then answered quietly, "Not yet. I don't want the court to see it before David does. He needs to witness it with his own eyes. Only then will justice mean something." Amelia was silent for a moment, then said slowly, "You're right. Nothing hurts more than a son realizing his wife has exploited his mother's trust." I nodded. "That's why I'd like Reverend Cole to help me. Arrange a small charity evening. A pretext, so they'll come." Amelia gave a soft, knowing laugh. "A staged night to expose the truth. Smart, Margaret. I'll ask Bennett to condense the file, give David a brief summary he can't ignore." Near dusk, I drove to St. Mary's. The red evening light washed over the old stone steps. Reverend Cole was lining up wooden chairs in the hall. After I explained the plan, he thought for a moment, then smiled kindly. "Sometimes the Lord doesn't need thunder to reveal sin, Margaret. He only needs the small light of truth." I squeezed his hand in thanks. "I just want David to see that light, not for revenge, but so he stops being blind." On the way home, I stopped by the corner store for a few supplies for the evening I was planning. Everything outside looked peaceful, with no hint that in just a few days, Clara's whole world would come crashing down. That evening, when I got home, I opened Bennett's file again. I spread everything across the dining table, every statement, every receipt, every piece of evidence. With a red pen, I marked the large withdrawals, then slipped them into a thick beige envelope. On the front, I wrote in bold, steady letters, "Donation documents, Senior Assistance Fund." Only I knew there wasn't a single donation inside, just guilt and deceit. I sat staring at the papers for a long time. My hands trembled, not from fear of retaliation, but because I could feel my heart beating strong again after months of numbness. For so long I'd thought I was just a widowed old woman living simply, someone who needed to be taken care of. But looking at that pile of proof, I realized I was never weak. I had just been convinced to believe I was. I stood up, poured a glass of water, and looked out at the backyard. The night sky was full of stars, so quiet I could hear the crickets between gusts of wind. I remembered what my husband used to say, "If someone hurts you, don't pray for their apology. Let them see their reflection in the mirror," I whispered. "I'm about to do exactly that." Around 8 p.m., the phone rang. It was Bennett again. "Mrs. Hayes, I just wanted to let you know, Amelia has everything ready in case you decide to file, but I respect your timing. Holding off until the right moment is wise. Clara will expose herself soon enough." I smiled. "I know. Thank you, Bennett. You've done more than an accountant's job. You've helped me believe in justice again." After hanging up, I locked the file away in the cabinet, just under the drawer that held my family photos. On top, I left a small note. "This is evidence not just of fraud, but of a mother who refuses to stay silent." Then I closed the drawer and turned the key, hearing the soft click, a small sound, but final, like a promise kept. That night, I wrote one short line in my notebook, like a quiet summary. Bennett gathered statements, receipts, travel tickets, and the new car papers. Clara spent over $40,000, all from the mother's allowance account. Amelia confirmed. Enough proof for an elder financial exploitation case. But I won't take it to court yet. My son needs to see it first. Reverend Cole will help stage the fake charity dinner. The envelope will sit in the center of the table. My hands tremble, not from fear, but because I'm about to reclaim my dignity. Tonight, I'll sleep in peace. I set the pen down and exhaled. The desk lamp cast a warm glow over an old family photo me with David when he was little, back when his smile was pure, untouched by ambition or that sweet-faced woman beside him now. I touched the frame gently and whispered, "You once told me, Mom, you're the person I trust most in the world. I'll make you remember that." I turned off the light and walked slowly to my bedroom. The night breeze slipped through the curtains, carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden. I lay down, pulled the blanket over me, and felt light, as if the months of humiliation had finally lifted. For the first time in 8 long months, I slept peacefully. Not because Clara hadn't yet faced punishment, but because I knew the truth was on my side. I had never loved a Sunday evening more. The late Texas sunlight poured over the small garden, turning the lavender vines golden. In the kitchen, the pot of red wine beef stew simmered softly, filling the house with the aroma of herbs. It was David's favorite dish since childhood. I still remembered how, every birthday, he'd ask for it because Mom's stew tastes better than any restaurant. This time, I wasn't cooking out of love, but as part of a ritual. A final dinner for my son to finally see the truth I had hidden too long. On the table, I laid out a crisp white tablecloth, antique porcelain dishes, and 3 small wine glasses. In the center, the beige envelope rested neatly like an invisible guest waiting to be acknowledged. Around 7 p.m., I heard the car outside. Through the window, I saw David and Clara arriving. He wore a simple white shirt, while she, as always, appeared overdressed, a pale pink silk dress, new heels, and a string of pearls gleaming at her neck. "Mom!" David hugged me tightly. "I miss this smell, your stew. It smells like home." I smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I made it for you, just like old times." Clara stood behind him, that polished, fake smile glued to her lips. "Oh, how cozy. You always make dinner feel so special, Mother." "Yes," I said softly. "Tonight will be very special." About 15 minutes later, Reverend Cole arrived, holding a large, white-wrapped envelope. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Here are the donation papers you asked me to bring." I took it with a nod of thanks and gestured for him to join us. Clara tilted her head, her voice syrupy. "Oh, so this really is a charity dinner. Mother? I thought you were joking." I poured everyone wine, smiling gently. "Yes, a dinner to talk about trust, giving, and honesty." The words made Clara stiffen slightly, but she quickly smoothed her expression. David kept smiling, unaware of the tension rising beneath the table. Once everyone was seated, I opened the envelope Reverend had brought. The papers inside were neatly arranged, Bennett's precision in every line. I pulled out the stack and spread the first sheet on the table. "Son," I said slowly, "this is the list of all the donations for Mother over the past 8 months. I think you should take a look." David frowned. "Donations? Mom, I've been sending you the transfers every month." I slid the statement toward him. The bold print was unmistakable. Recipient: Clara Hayes. Amount: $5,000. Date: 15th of each month. David went silent. His eyes dropped to the page, widening from confusion to shock. Clara jumped in, voice sweet but pitched high. "Oh, that must be some mix-up, Mother. You've been getting the money, right?" "Banks make mistakes with recipient names all the time." I kept my voice calm. "Is that so? Then how about this spa bill in Houston, around $1,200, charged to the secondary card under your name? Was that the bank's mistake too?" Her face stiffened, but she forced a laugh. "Oh dear, maybe someone used my name by accident." Before she could finish, a deep male voice came from the doorway. "No, Mrs. Hayes, no one used your name by accident. I'm the one who prepared those records." Everyone turned. Bennett stood at the threshold, holding more printed pages. I had asked him to come, but hadn't told anyone else. Clara's face went pale. David looked at him, confused. "Who are you?" "I'm Bennett," he said firmly. chief accountant at your firm and the one your mother authorized to investigate the transfers made under her name." The air froze. I rose, facing Clara. "Bennett can verify every amount, every signature, every transaction. 8 transfers, 5,000 each. Not once did they reach me." David turned to his wife, voice breaking. "Clara, what is this?" She grabbed his hand, tears welling up. I just borrowed it, that's all. I was going to pay it back. I didn't want to upset your mother." I sighed softly. 8 months of borrowing, and by forging bank papers under your mother-in-law's name? Clara sobbed harder, but her tears didn't carry guilt, only desperation. David pulled his hand away, eyes burning. "What did you do to my mother?" he shouted, voice shaking with fury. "I sent that money so she could live comfortably. You used it for cars, spas, vacations, and lied to my face?" Clara stepped back, face drained of color. "You don't understand, Enough." David slammed his palm on the table. The glass rattled sharply. The room fell silent, only Clara's ragged breathing and my pounding heartbeat filled the air. Reverend Cole, who had sat quietly the whole time, folded his hands and spoke in a low, steady tone. "Sometimes God doesn't need to punish the guilty. He just lets them see their true reflection." I sat back down and looked at Clara, my voice calm. "You know, I didn't need that money. What I needed was respect. And you took that not just from me, but from your husband too." Clara sobbed, stammering, "Mother, I'm sorry. I just wanted to help David manage things better. I didn't mean." I shook my head. "Stop lying. You didn't manage, you stole." Bennett stepped forward, placing the final file in front of David. "These are the originals, Mr. Hayes. Forged authorizations, bank records, and receipts. Keep them. You'll need them to protect what's yours." David said nothing. He stared at the numbers, then lifted his eyes to me. In them, I saw pain, shame, and the first spark of awakening. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I was such a fool to trust her." I laid a hand on his shoulder. "No, son. The mistake isn't in trust, it's in those who betray it." Clara burst into sobs, glancing wildly around for an escape. "I can't take this anymore," she screamed, then suddenly stood. "I don't need anyone's pity. If you want to believe her, go ahead." She snatched her purse and stormed out. Her heels struck the wooden floor, each step sounding like the end of something. David didn't stop her. He just sat, head bowed. The door slammed shut. Silence fell. No more crying, no more excuses, only the fading smell of stew and the heavy presence of truth. I looked at the open envelope, papers scattered, proof of 8 months of deceit. I exhaled softly. "It's done," I said quietly. "The curtain's fallen." Bennett nodded, gathering the files. Reverend Cole rose and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've done what not every mother has the courage to do, Margaret." I smiled faintly, but inside there was an empty ache. This victory didn't bring joy, only release. When everyone left, I stayed behind. I cleared the table, the half-eaten plates, the red wine glasses, the chair where Clara had sat, still faintly warm. I looked around the room, remembering every word, every glance. 8 months of deception, and in one evening it had shattered like glass. I gathered the fallen pages, stacked them neatly, and placed them back in the envelope. My hands trembled, not from fear, but because I had finally reclaimed my dignity. Outside, the wind rose, lifting the curtains. I looked up at the sky, moonlight streaming through the window, shining on the envelope like a seal of truth. I knew every lie eventually comes to light. And tonight, it had right here in my own home. I picked up the envelope, noticing the blue stamp, Texas County Court. My chest tightened. I'd known this would come, but seeing it made my heart heavy. Inside was the official notice. Case No. 2-3CF98. 1. Margaret Hayes, plaintiff versus Clara Hayes, defendant. Elder financial exploitation and family fraud. Amelia had moved faster than I expected. She'd sent a short message. All evidence filed. Prepare for preliminary hearing next Monday. I set the letter on the table. Afternoon light filtered through the blinds, falling across Bennett's thick folder from the week before. I touched its smooth cover, cold to the touch, but holding 8 months of betrayal inside. Justice was close. But strangely, I felt no satisfaction. The morning of the hearing, the sky was gray. The wind sharp like something about to break. I arrived early with Amelia. She wore a brown coat, her face stern but full of resolve. "You holding up, Margaret?" she asked as we walked into the main hall. I pressed my lips together. "I am. I just wish it didn't have to come to this." The courthouse hallway was long, tiled in glossy white, smelling faintly of coffee, paper, and tension. It was unfamiliar, but somehow it made me feel safe. When we entered the courtroom, Clara was already there. She sat at the defendant's table in a black suit, hair neatly tied back, her face pale but her eyes pretending calm. Beside her sat a young lawyer, nervous, likely hired last minute. David sat behind them, alone and silent. He didn't look at me or at her. His eyes were sunken, tired, and hollow. When I sat down, Clara glanced over and gave a faint smile, a mix of defiance and despair. The judge struck the gavel. The court is now in session for the case of elder financial exploitation, Margaret Hayes versus Clara Hayes. Amelia stood first, opening her file. Her voice was clear and steady. "Your Honor, for 8 consecutive months the defendant, Mrs. Clara Hayes, used a fraudulent bank account under her mother-in-law's name to misappropriate a total of $40,000. Additionally, the defendant used a company's secondary credit card belonging to Hayes and Partners for personal expenses, including spa services, travel, and a private vehicle purchase." The courtroom went silent, except for the soft rustle of paper, as Amelia laid out the evidence: bank statements, spa receipts, the Lexus invoice, Cancun tickets, each placed neatly before the judge. She paused, then looked directly at Clara. The defendant not only took money from her mother-in-law, a 67-year-old widow, but concealed it by forging legal documents and falsifying bank signatures. This was a deliberate, systematic act of deception. Clara's lawyer quickly stood, trying to object. "Your Honor, my client maintains this was merely a misunderstanding in household financial management. Mrs. Margaret Hayes is elderly and may have misremembered the transfers from her son's account and household expenses." I felt my blood boil. Clara lowered her head, feigning fragility, then looked up, her voice trembling. "Your Honor, my mother-in-law's been forgetful lately. I've brought her money many times, but she doesn't remember. I never meant to hurt anyone. Maybe she just misunderstood." Those words cut through my chest like a knife. I wanted to jump up and scream, but Amelia placed a hand on my shoulder, signaling me to stay calm. Then she stepped forward, her voice sharp as steel. "Your Honor, Mrs. Margaret Hayes' memory is sharp enough to document, in detail, every single day Clara visited and everything she said. And here is her journal to prove it." Amelia pulled out my brown leather notebook and held it up. "In this, Mrs. Hayes recorded 8 full months of visits, dates, times, and even the defendant's exact words. I left the envelope in the car. Every line and page perfectly matches the bank transaction data. If this is what you call memory loss, then it's the sharpest one I've ever seen." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge peered over his glasses, slowly flipped through a few pages of the file, then frowned and turned toward Bennett, who had been invited as an expert witness. "Mr. Bennett," the judge said, "do you confirm the figures in this report?" Bennett stood, adjusted his tie, and replied firmly, "Your Honor, I am the chief accountant at Hayes and Partners. I confirm that all statements and reconciliations are authentic. Each transfer was made from Mr. David Hayes' personal account to an account opened under the name Margaret Hayes. However, that account was in fact opened and controlled by the defendant, Mrs. Clara Hayes. The judge nodded, his expression stern. I looked toward Clara. She lowered her head, nails digging into her palms, her face pale. Amelia continued, Your Honor, under the Texas Elder Protection Act, the defendant's conduct constitutes elder financial exploitation and marital financial fraud. We request that the court order the defendant to return the full amount, including interest and court fees, and prohibit her from managing or accessing any financial accounts belonging to Mr. Fecht. David Hayes for the next 5 years. No one spoke. The only sound was the steady ticking of the wall clock. The judge lifted his head, his voice firm and final. After reviewing all documents, testimonies, and evidence, the court rules. The defendant, Mrs. Clara Hayes, shall repay the full $40,000 to Mrs. Margaret Hayes. The defendant is hereby stripped of access to, and management rights over, her husband, Mr. David Hayes's financial accounts. The defendant must also complete a mandatory 6-month financial rehabilitation program. This court is adjourned. The gavel struck 3 times, dry and cold, like the sound of a steel door closing. Clara sank into her chair. I saw her trying to keep her composure, but tears began spilling down her cheeks. She turned to David, her voice trembling. You have to believe me. I didn't mean to. David said nothing. He just looked at her with empty eyes, then turned away. The sight made my heart crack open. I didn't feel joy, nor triumph. Only a dull ache, because to reclaim justice, I had to watch my son lose his marriage. I had once dreamed that David would be happy someday, with someone who loved and cared for him, with a warm home of his own. Now that dream had vanished, buried somewhere between the pages of a court file. Amelia placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice gentle. You did the right thing, Margaret. You didn't just protect yourself, you saved your son. I nodded, but my lips couldn't form a smile. Justice, I realized, is a double-edged sword. It cuts through the chains of deceit, but also severs the fragile threads of family. When I left the courthouse, the sky had already turned dark gray. Rain began to fall, heavy drops splashing onto the stone steps, breaking apart into hundreds of smaller ones. I stood under the awning, looking up. The rain was cold against my skin, yet somehow I felt lighter inside. There was no applause, no cheers, no sense of victory, only the quiet peace of someone who had walked the full circle of justice. I whispered softly, as if speaking to the rain itself. David, I don't know if you can forgive me, but at least I've held on to the one thing I could never afford to lose, the truth. The rain kept falling as I walked away step by step, leaving behind the courthouse, a place where justice had prevailed, but a mother's heart had quietly fractured. After the trial, my house returned to an eerie stillness. No more unexpected knocks on the door, no more hurried phone calls. Only the ticking of the wall clock and sunlight slipping through the curtains, lighting up tiny specks of dust floating in the air. Months passed, and David didn't call. No messages, no emails, no, "How are you, Mom?" I didn't blame him. I understood he was trying to clean up the wreckage of his marriage. Still, on quiet nights, when moonlight crossed the window pane, I often found myself holding the phone, staring at the name David Hayes in my contacts, never pressing call, just looking, then setting it down. Being a mother, I learned, sometimes means knowing when silence is the only way to let your child grow. The restitution payment arrived one morning in June, $40,000, a sum I hadn't seen in 8 long months. I opened the email from the bank and read the words, "Deposit completed successfully." I thought I'd feel joy, but instead, I felt hollow. I sat in front of the computer for a long while, then a thought came. If that money had once been a tool of deceit, then now it had to become something good. I used a small portion to repair the roof, replace the curtains, and finally buy a proper heater. As for the rest, I reached out to Reverend Cole and Amelia. "I want to start a small foundation," I said as we sat in the parish office. "I'll call it Grace Hands Foundation. I want to help elderly people who've been financially exploited by their own children or family just like I was." Reverend Cole looked at me for a long moment, then smiled gently behind his thick glasses. "Margaret, this isn't just kindness. This is how God turns pain into the seed of something good." Amelia, ever the practical one, flipped open her notebook and began writing. "We'll register it as a non-profit. I'll handle the legal side. Reverend Cole can represent the community group. And you'll be the founder." I chuckled softly, gripping my coffee cup. "I don't want to be the founder, Amelia. I'm just a mother who learned how to stand up again." 3 months later, Grace Hands Foundation officially opened. Our first office was in the basement of St. Mary's Church, just 3 desks, an old printer, and a wooden sign carved with the words, "Helping the Forgotten, Find There. Voice Again." Each week, Reverend Cole and I met people who came to share their stories. An old woman tricked by her daughter into signing away her home, a 70-year-old man whose grandson drained his pension account, an 80-year-old widow whose signature was forged for a bank loan. Each story was a wound, but I had learned how to listen without crying. I simply held their hands and told them what I had lived, that the truth doesn't save you instantly, but it always arrives right on time. Amelia worked tirelessly reaching out to legal organizations, applying for grants, training volunteers. I oversaw what we called the heart work, listening, writing letters, comforting people, documenting their journeys. One afternoon, while tidying up the desks, Reverend Cole said quietly, "Margaret, isn't it strange? Pain has become light for others." I smiled. Maybe that's how God rewrites the ending for those who were once betrayed. As the foundation grew, reporters began to reach out. They wanted to interview the brave mother who sued her millionaire daughter-in-law. Some invited me onto talk shows. One newspaper even offered a book deal. I declined them all. I didn't want to become a story for people to gossip about. I just wanted peace. Sometimes silence is the only way to keep a wound from bleeding again. I told Amelia when she asked why I avoided the media. She nodded. "You're right. Justice can be public, but healing has to be private." At night, I developed a new ritual. I'd place a small candle on the table by the window. Its gentle glow would fall on the photo of David and me. I'd light the candle and whisper, "Where are you, David? I'm not angry. I just hope you've learned something from all this pain." The flame flickered, illuminating that old picture, David's innocent smile, the one untouched by betrayal. I touched the cold glass frame, and warmth spread through my heart. I realized forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing not to let the wound define the rest of your life. Sometimes Reverend Cole would ask, "Margaret, have you truly forgiven her?" I'd answer, "Maybe I have, because I no longer want her to suffer. But forget? No. The betrayed can forgive but never forget." He'd smile. "You're still the strong Margaret, I know." One crisp autumn morning, while I was watering the plants on the porch, Amelia arrived with a new envelope. Our foundation just received funding from the Elder Justice Fund. They want a long-term partnership. I looked at the envelope, feeling both proud and humbled. Who would have thought a woman who once survived on canned food from the church was now helping others reclaim their dignity? I didn't cry. I simply smiled, a real, gentle smile, soft as mist. Yet, on quiet nights, I still sometimes hear the wind brushing against the door, sounding almost like my son's voice calling. I know David isn't ready yet. Maybe he's still trying to forgive himself. Maybe he's paying his penance through silence. I don't blame him. I wait not because I need him, but because I need the truth to come full circle. The truth about motherhood, trust, and a love that survives even betrayal. I believe that one day, when my son knocks on my door, I will still open it not because I've forgotten everything, but because I've learned to love without letting myself be broken again. I light the candle, watching its flickering glow dance across the frame. Outside, the wind carries the scent of lavender into the room. I whisper, like a prayer, "My son, I don't need you to apologize. I just hope you remember this trust is the most precious gift we have, and once it's lost, it can take a lifetime to find again." The flame shrinks to a thin golden thread, but I stay there, watching until it fades completely. My heart strangely calm, because I know the storm has passed, and this stillness is mine. That night, rain poured steadily from dusk till midnight. Wind lashed against the windows, scattering the lavender pots I had brought in earlier that morning. The yellow lamp in the living room reflected on the wet glass, glimmering like fragments of the memories I'd been sorting away for months. I was sitting by the window, reviewing the donation files for next week's Grace Hands Foundation meeting, when I heard a knock, soft but insistent, carrying the chill of the storm. I looked up. It was past 10 p.m. At my age, few people knock that late unless... I walked to the door, my hand trembling as I turned the latch. The door swung open, wind rushing in, rain splattering onto my coat, and there under the downpour stood David. He was drenched, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes red and weary. In that instant, time froze. The boy I once held in my arms, the one I taught to tie his shoelaces, now stood before me, trembling like a lost child. "Mom," his voice cracked. "Mom, I'm sorry. I've been so stupid." Before I could respond, he stepped inside and sank to his knees on the wet floor. A broken sob escaped him raw, unguarded. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. And I just stood there, looking at my son, the man who once thought he understood everything, now crumbling in the very house where he was raised to value honesty. I knelt beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said softly, "David, get up, son. Everyone stumbles. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's saving yourself." He lifted his head, tears mixing with rain, streaming down his face. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I doubted you, let her manipulate me, stayed silent while you suffered. Mom, I lost everything." I shook my head gently, guiding him to the sofa, drying his hair with a towel as I used to when he was little. Each motion was slow, tender, as if moving too fast might shatter the fragile moment of reconnection. "I don't need your apology," I said quietly. "I just need you to remember truth never arrives late. It only waits until we're brave enough to face it." He said nothing, only stared at the flickering fireplace. Outside, the rain beat against the window like the belated heartbeat of a soul waking up. After a long pause, David whispered, as if afraid of his own words, "Clara's gone, Mom." I stopped drying his hair. He continued, "She drained the savings account, took what was left from the company, and disappeared. They say she ran off with a man she'd known before we were married." I closed my eyes. No anger, no surprise, just a quiet sadness settling in, like the rain that had already accepted the end of the storm. David's voice trembled. I tried calling, texting, looking everywhere, but she vanished. She only left one message: "You trusted the wrong person." I took his hand, warm, firm. "No, son," I said. "You just realized the truth too late, but even when trust is broken, it's still what separates us from those who deceive." He rested his head on my shoulder like a child who had finally found his way home. I felt his breath, uneven but real. Then came a soft sob. "I lost everything, Mom, my career, my money, my dignity." I stroked his hair, my voice calm. "No, my son. What you found tonight is far greater the heart that knows how to admit its mistakes." The rain lasted until almost midnight. I brewed him a cup of ginger tea while he sat curled up by the fireplace. Steam rose, mingling with the scent of burning wood, filling the room with warmth. "I don't understand how you can stay so calm after everything," he said quietly. I smiled faintly. "Because I know justice isn't about making someone pay, it's about restoring balance. You see, Clara reaped exactly what she sowed." He nodded, staring at the dancing flames. "I only have you left now, Mom." "No," I replied, "you still have yourself. And what you choose to do from this moment on will decide whether you truly stand again." He was silent for a while, then suddenly said, "Mom, can I help with your foundation? I want to do something meaningful. Maybe start this weekend?" I looked at him. His eyes were sincere, so much that I had to fight the swell of emotion rising in my chest. "Are you sure, son?" "Of course, Mom. I don't want to live the way I used to anymore. I want to relearn how to use money to heal instead of to hurt." I nodded. "Then come on Saturday. Reverend Cole will be happy to see you." From that day on, David came to help at the foundation every weekend. He drove in early, bringing coffee for everyone, then sat with me organizing files and writing thank you letters to donors. Some days he helped Reverend Cole move chairs. Other days, he went with Amelia to meet elderly victims and record their stories. People say time heals everything. But for me, it wasn't time. It was my son's transformation that became the real medicine. One morning, I saw him sitting at his desk, focused on fixing a spreadsheet, his brown hair glinting in the sunlight. In that moment, I saw my little David again, the boy who used to help me wash dishes, who once asked, "Mom, what does honesty mean?" I looked at him, my heart swelling with tenderness and gratitude. "David?" I called softly. He looked up. "Yeah? You've crossed your own pains, son," I said, smiling. "Not everyone has the courage to do that." He smiled faintly, a rare, genuine smile I hadn't seen in months. "If it weren't for you, Mom, I don't know how long I'd still be drowning in guilt." I placed a hand on his shoulder, my voice warm. "I didn't save you, David. You saved yourself." Outside, a gentle rain began to fall. I looked through the window, raindrops slid down the glass, then disappeared. The door he had once knocked on that stormy night now stood open. No more rain pouring in, only the wind carrying the scent of damp earth and lavender. In that quiet moment, I understood. Life, no matter how broken, always leaves a door open for those who wish to return. And as I watched my son smile in that sunlit room, I knew the storm had passed, and peace had finally found its way home. One autumn morning, as soft sunlight spilled through the window, I sat at my desk, staring at a blank sheet of paper. The breeze carried a faint lavender scent from the porch, my favorite fragrance, gentle yet patient, a reminder of endurance. I picked up my pen. The ink flowed smoothly like breath, and the first words appeared. "Clara, thank you. Because of you, I learned the true value of honesty and the strength of self-respect." I paused, watching the ink spread faintly under the morning light. Strangely, there was no anger in me, only a quiet peace. I continued writing. "If not for you, I might still believe that truth is something obvious, that kindness is always repaid in kind. But you taught me something different. Truth only has meaning when we're brave enough to defend it. You took my money, but in return, you gave me something money could never buy: freedom." I smiled softly. My handwriting became lighter, gentler. "I don't know where you are now or if you've found peace, but if one day you read this, I want you to know, I forgave you. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to stay chained to the darkness you left behind." I set the pen down and looked at the page, now full. A letter written for no one, but written with the clarity of a heart that had once been broken and healed itself. I folded it carefully, slipped it into a cream envelope, then opened a small wooden box my late husband used to keep old birthday cards. I placed the letter inside, among family photos and a note he once wrote me. "Margaret, truth doesn't need to be shouted, only lived." I closed the box, hearing the soft, Click of wood, a sound like a chapter gently closing. In the months that followed, Grace Hand's foundation grew faster than I could have imagined. Each week, we welcomed new people. Some arrived in tears, some with messy folders, some needing nothing more than a place to finally tell the story they had buried in silence. I saw myself in them, people once deceived, once belittled, but still clinging to the belief that justice exists. And every time we helped someone reclaim their rights, I felt like I was reclaiming a fragment of my own past. One day, David stopped by the office with 2 cups of hot coffee. He sat beside me, looking around the room now filled with posters, charts, and smiling faces on thank you cards. "I can't believe how big your foundation's become," he said, his voice a mix of pride and emotion. "You really did turn pain into light." I chuckled softly, setting my cup down. "Not the light of God, my son. The light of justice. God forgives, but justice never forgets." David nodded slowly. "Maybe I'm finally learning to understand that." I looked at him, and in his eyes I saw the man he had become, not the weak one who once ran from truth, but someone who now bowed to what was right. In that moment, my heart felt as light as air. I'm no longer afraid of being poor. The days of standing in line for canned food at the church are long gone, but I don't feel shame remembering them. If anything, I'm grateful those days taught me the dignity of endurance. I've realized there's something worth far more than money: self-respect. When a person holds on to self-respect, they can't truly be defeated even when they lose everything else. Now, every morning I still wake early, brew a pot of tea, and open the windows to let the light in. Sunlight spills across the photo of my husband and me. He's wearing a white shirt, his arm around my shoulders, eyes gentle and kind. I smile at him. "If only you could see this, you'd be proud of me, wouldn't you?" If he were still alive, I know he'd smile, not because of the money I recovered, but because I kept the strength he once loved in me, the strength to never let anyone else define my worth. That evening, after David left the office, I stayed behind, opened the old journal that had followed me through this journey, and wrote the final line: "The thief is gone, but the lesson remains." I paused, looking out the window. The sky was turning pale orange, raindrops tapping softly on the roof. I heard the distant church bells ringing slow, deep, like time breathing. I closed the journal, feeling as though I'd finished a prayer. No need for revenge, no need for applause, just the peace of knowing that even in a cruel world, honesty still has a place to stand. I blew out the candle beside the photo frame. Its light dimmed, leaving a faint trace of wax in the air. And in the darkness, I whispered to myself, "Thank you, Clara. Thank you for taking everything from me so I could finally learn that the most important thing in life isn't holding on. It's learning how to rise again." A year later, Texas bloomed into spring. Lavender flourished by the porch, and the morning sky turned the soft blue of silk. I was brewing tea when the phone rang, a call from Austin. A woman's cheerful voice came through. "Mrs. Margaret Hayes? Congratulations, you've been selected as Texas Woman of the Year. The council honors those who've contributed to social justice and senior rights. We'd love for you to speak at next week's ceremony." I froze for a moment, not from pride but disbelief. A year ago, I was a 67-year-old widow living off church aid. Now, they called me a symbol of peaceful justice. Life, it seems, always finds a way to turn when you keep believing in the truth. The ceremony was held in the grand hall of the city courthouse. I chose a light blue dress, simple, like the life I now lived. No glamour, no pretense. When I stepped onto the stage, applause filled the room. Among the crowd, I saw David in the second row, wearing a white shirt, his eyes glowing with pride I hadn't seen since he was a boy. The host smiled. Mrs. Margaret Hayes, the founder of Grace Hand's Foundation, a woman who turned personal pain into a force for justice, helping dozens of seniors reclaim their dignity. I walked to the wooden podium. my hands slightly trembling but my voice steady. "Thank you," I began. "But today I'm not telling my story. I'm telling the story of an unnamed mother who was deceived by her own daughter-in-law who lost both her money and her trust." The hall went silent. Faces young and old, men and women, all leaned in. I once thought that when someone betrays you, the best revenge is silence. But I learned something else. When someone steals your trust, reclaim it with truth. No shouting, no hatred, just truth. Because truth holds a power no punishment ever could. Applause erupted long and heartfelt. I paused, taking a deep breath. From the front row, I saw David wiping his eyes. The look on his face almost broke me, not out of pity, but because I knew he finally understood. When I spoke again, my voice softened, warm and low, like a message for everyone who'd ever been broken by betrayal. Justice isn't just what happens in court. It begins the moment you find the courage to say, "Enough," even when the one who's wronged you is someone you love. That's the bravest act any mother, any father, or any human being can do. After the ceremony, there were photos, handshakes, bouquets. I don't remember all the faces, but I remember the feeling, a deep peace. No bitterness, no resentment, just quiet fulfillment. As I stepped outside, light rain began to fall. Texas skies always knew how to remind me that even in the rain, there's light. I stood under the awning, watching the drops glimmer under the streetlights, my heart lighter than ever. David came up beside me, draping his jacket over my shoulders. "Mom," he said softly, "I've never seen you shine like this." I smiled, holding his hand. "It's not because of the award, son. It's because you're here like the old days. Only now, you truly understand what honesty means." He smiled back, eyes still misty. "I do, Mom, and I promise I'll live by it." I looked up at the sky. The rain still fell, but it no longer felt cold. Inside me, a small light rose, the light of faith, of freedom, of new beginnings. That night, back home, I sat at my desk and opened my worn journal. I wrote the final line, "A mother's greatest victory isn't winning in court, it's teaching her child the value of honesty." I closed the book, listening to the wind outside, the faint scent of rain still clinging to the roof. On the table, the small candle flickered, casting a soft glow over the family photo, my husband, me, and little David. 3 faces in one frame, 3 moments in time, bound by one truth. Love never dies, it just changes form. I smiled. My life was no longer loud, rich, or grand, but it was full in its own quiet, peaceful way. And if you're still here with me listening, maybe sitting in your own quiet room tonight, I want to say this. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of my story. If you've ever faced injustice or betrayal within your own family, share your story in the comments below. I truly want to hear it, because maybe your voice today could help someone else find hope tomorrow. And if you believe, as I always have, that the truth will always find its way home, please, subscribe, and stay for the next stories. I'll tell you about women, about mothers, about those who once fell but rose again through the light of justice and compassion. From Texas, with all my gratitude and love, I'm Margaret Hayes, a mother who found happiness in her own peaceful way.